Hey guys, this is part 3 of my series on how I built my ES-335 type electric guitar. I thought for this last video I'd just try doing a voiceover because some people have been asking some questions about how I actually did things and what were some of the techniques I used. Just in general, the idea of the series was just to be a bit of a time-lapse to show you how I went from the pieces of timber and the products I used to the final product, but I'm happy to explain some of the final sort of things that I did in building the guitar. So what I'm doing here is wet sanding, obviously. I let the guitar cure for 3 or 4 weeks after I applied the clear coat, just to make sure that it was really dry. Even then, after 3 or 4 weeks, it still wasn't as dry as I probably would have liked. I mean, you can leave these things up to 2 or 3 months really if you want to ensure that they're as hard as possible before you start wet sanding. So what I'm doing here is I'm wet sanding from 600 grit all the way up to 2000 grit. A lot of the footage isn't actually here, but just to show generally, what I did was I started with 600, went 800, 1000, 1200, 1500 grit, 18, and then 2000 grit. The whole point of sanding up to 2000 grit, which actually ends up being a little bit shiny already, is that generally compounds, or I know for a fact that Meguiar's Ultimate Compound can only remove scratches that are 1500 grit and upwards, so it won't really do anything for scratches that are say 1300 or 1200 grit. So that's why I did that. So once I'd gotten it up to 2000, you'll see here I basically used Meguiar's Compound, put a few dabs onto a little polishing wheel that I bought from my local auto store that attaches to my drill. So I used a fair bit of pressure, so I was pushing down, but I made sure that I was moving a lot because you don't want to stay in any one spot. If it gets too dry or if it gets too hot, you can burn the finish or you can scratch the finish. So you just want to make sure that there's always lubrication there, and you just keep moving around on the body, and then wipe off once it becomes a bit of a haze. So yeah, buff out the compound once it's quite hazy. You'll see there, and as well on this side, that just that first pass of Meguiar's Ultimate Compound already does wonders. It's really great. It brings out the shine pretty much straight away, and those sort of micro scratches that are left behind aren't really too easy to see unless you have some form of some light that is really shining at an angle where you can see all those micro scratches. So yeah, the first pass with the Ultimate Compound really is what did a bulk of the work, and I used, as you can see there, a pretty firm foam wheel for the first pass with Meguiar's, as opposed to what I then used for the polishing phase. You'll see here I used a pretty soft foam polishing wheel for the polishing phase. So I used Mother's polish, which is like a renovating or rejuvenating polish. So it's generally a second step after a compound and before a wax layer or a wax Carnauba wax or something like that. So another thing is just to make sure you use a completely different rag for buffing out the different levels of polish or compound, because if you have like Ultimate Compound say stuck on your rag and then you're using that same rag to buff out the polish, the Meguiar's itself could create scratches in the finish after the polish has already taken them out. Here I'm just installing some of the parts. Won't go into too much detail, but obviously some pretty high-end parts like Goto locking tuners, as well as Goto bridge and CTS pots, etc. So all pretty high-end products in the build itself. The hardest part probably of the install or of the assembly was installing the wiring loom that I created in the previous video into the guitar itself, because it's a hollow body. There's no you know, backplate or anything that you can access to put the wiring in. So obviously you have to use the F-holes as your access to the internal cavity, which means you need to use string, put string through the potentiometer holes through to the F-hole. To be honest, this took me probably a few hours at the end of the day. I didn't get it all on tape, but the general gist is shown here.